Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world today. It is Almanack Day once again, and this time turning to magic in Warhammer the Old World. An article packed full of information, so let's have a look. But before we do so, just a quick note from me to say please do excuse the voice. I've had a visitation from Papa Nurgle, but we'll plough on and see how we get on. So, to magic. The article from Games Workshop does open up by reminding us that Warhammer the Old World is going to be set before the establishment of the College of Magic in the Empire. Now, we already knew the game was going to be set before the Great Chaos Incursion, and it was only after that point that Magnus the Pious allowed the Colleges of Magic to be formed with the assistance of Teclis. However, that doesn't mean there won't be magic in the game, and we've known this for a while. We've seen some snippets. What we now see is that there are going to be 8 core types of magic in the rulebook. These are battle magic, dark magic, demonology, elementalism, high magic, illusion, necromancy, and war magic. Now, some of these will be familiar to existing players from previous editions of Warhammer Fantasy. There's also some new names coming in there, and when I say new, really it's more of a throwback to the roleplay games than anything we've necessarily seen in the recent, air quotes, recent editions of Warhammer Fantasy. Things like demonology, elementalism, illusion magic, things like that. It'll be interesting to see how these exactly play out in the rules. As some of you may recall, for example, the Greenskins had 2 different types of war magic, one for orcs and one for goblins, and that isn't something that's apparent from the article, so more of a consolidation of their magical powers maybe, at least until we start seeing more than just the core rulebook. It's also of note that wizards, magicians will have access to 2 or more of these types of spells. So we're not going to see wizards really restricted to one type of magic. And it says that the lore being used is selected at the start of each battle. As an aside, I think it'll be interesting to see how tournament play goes with this, whether you choose a lore for the tournament or whether you will be able to switch spells and spell lores on a game-by-game basis. But that will probably be, I'd imagine, for the tournament organisers to decide for themselves. The next bit of the article touches on the 6 categories of spells: enchantments, hex, conveyances, magic missiles, magical vortexes, and assailments. It's good to see all of this brought together in one article, but I don't think this really offers us much that's new. We've already seen these headings appearing in previous articles when looking at the specific 4 phases that will make up a game turn. But it's from this point when we start to see things which I think are a little bit more interesting, and we learn how spells are going to be cast. And casting spells does seem to be fairly straightforward. Simply roll 2d6, add your wizard's magic level on a level basis of between 1 and 4. If that number beats the casting value of the spell, it goes off. Double 1s are a miscast, and double 6s are a perfect conjuration, or more correctly to say, a perfect invocation, with the miscast leading to another roll on a table and some potentially nasty things happening to the wizard in question. The article goes on to describe how spells can then be dispelled. Simply, you roll 2d6, again at the wizard's magic level, and if that dice roll beats the casting value, or the casting roll I should say, then the spell is stopped. However, this isn't quite the same as it's always been in the past, and there's 2 reasons for that. One, a double 1 to dispel also equates to effectively a miscast. They're calling it outclassed in the art, but it's a miscast roll nonetheless, making it a bit of a risk to try and stop spells. Maybe that's something to bear in mind, that if it's not going to do horrendous amounts of damage, do you want to risk that double 1? The other difference is that wizards of different levels have different ranges that they can attempt to dispel opponent's spells. So if a level 1 or level 2 caster's getting involved, they can only try and stop spells cast within 18 inches of them. Whereas level 3 and 4 mages can try and stop a spell cast within 24 inches. Now, I'm not entirely sure that that's a necessary addition to the game. Yes, I've supported not oversimplifying Warhammer, but now to have loads of different aura abilities and different distances for everything, it just feels a little bit unnecessary, because a Warhammer battlefield as well, it doesn't represent an absolutely ginormous space. Whilst Games Workshop, they've never really nailed down exactly what a unit represents in real terms. So is a block of 30 models 30 men or 300? That's never made clear. But I think with mages having such a narrow distance, I'm not sure. It doesn't feel quite right for me, but hey ho. We'll see how it plays on the tabletop, I suppose. The other new innovation is the Fated Dispel. So this is once per turn, an army can attempt to dispel a spell. This is done if it's not possible to attempt a normal dispel. So it gives a fighting chance to armies that don't have wizards of their own. So maybe mono, Khorne, warriors or demons of chaos armies. Although this won't include dwarf armies, as the article does specifically state that runesmiths are going to be capable of making dispel attempts. So they're going to be, it looks like, more in line with normal wizards, albeit it'll be interesting to see what advantages they bring to the army other than just chances of dispelling magic cast against them. From here we go into a case study, this time looking at a handmaiden of the lady. So we get an opportunity to see what an entry in the army books, or certainly in the initial PDF, will look like, albeit I notice it doesn't give you the base cost for that unit, but it does outline the stats and the cost of the various options along with special rules. So it looks like we're looking at about 30 points per wizard level, and we see that Bretonnians are going to have access to battle magic, elementalism, and illusion magic. There are a load of special rules mentioned within this section, most of which we're not clear on what they absolutely mean yet, but I think we can guess on some of them. So Armoured Hide, I would imagine, gives a +1 to the armour save, and Magic Resistance -2, I'd imagine, will give you a 2 pip penalty to casting a spell on that particular unit. The article concludes its conversation on magic by giving us the details of the signature spells from each of 3 of the 8 magical disciplines. Now, we don't see how magic spells are going to be selected. We don't know if it's free choice. We don't know if it, as it used to be, you roll a number of dice equal to your level, and whatever you get on the dice equates to a spell. So if you roll a 2, you get this number 2 spell, etc. That's not clear, but we do know that you're always going to have access to the signature spell, which suggests some kind of swap being possible and not just a free choice of spells. So with that, we might as well have a quick look. So what have we got with the battle magic lore? Well, we've got a spell called Hammer Hand. It's a assailment spell cast in combat with a casting value of 7+. It does 2d3 strength 4 hits with an armor penetration of -2. Now, being cast in combat, it's not going to be a spell particularly useful for sort of clearing chaff units or getting rid of screens, like a fireball might be, something like that. But I can see just adding maybe 1 or 2 key wounds, especially if a combat's looking likely to be a little bit close, maybe breaking that rank if you can just need that extra wound. So could make the subtle difference in a combat resolution outcome, and the difference between maybe a unit fleeing, retiring in good order, or whatever. At a 7+, particularly if you've got a reasonable level spellcaster getting involved, I think you've got a good chance of getting this one off. The signature spell for illusion magic is the Glittering Robe, an enchantment cast on an 8+, which gives the caster plus the unit they're with, importantly, a -1 modifier to any rolls to hit them. This will certainly seem to help with the survivability of units coming across the field if they're looking to get into combat but wading through a bunch of shooting units on their way in. This does look quite useful. A -1 to hit is always valuable, particularly if there's a key unit you're trying to get across the battlefield. So definitely something I'd keep an eye on. How this tallies with other Bretonnian rules that may give some negatives, particularly against shooting. Not sure at this point, but yeah, as a signature spell, seems pretty useful. Turning to elementalism, we see Stormcall, a hex cast on a 7+ with a range of 12 inches. This reduces the enemy unit's movement and initiative by 1. I think this one looks a little bit more situational to me. The short range of the spell at 12 inches means you're not going to particularly play mayhem with the opponent's ability to move around. However, depending on how the initiative really plays into when there's a charge or not a charge, it could just make that difference between striking first and striking second, particularly if there's a combat where you really want to be going first. So at a 7+, it's going to be fairly easy to cast, but you're going to need your initiatives to be at least level, I think, for this to be making a massive difference. Having resolved the conversation about magic, we get an indication of what the next Almanack will be, which will be looking at Grail Knights and how they interact with universal special rules. Now, I think there had been a bit of a feeling out there that this will be the final Almanack, the one about magic. So good to see there's still more stuff coming to help us understand what the game will look like when it's released. So what do we think overall? Now, I know a lot of people are going to miss the magic phase. We've had this knowledge already for quite a while that the magic phase is going, and the mini game around dispel dice and casting dice or even card-based system isn't going to be there. And as I say, I know that a lot of people really enjoyed that. For me, I'm not that bothered that the magic phase is going away and that spells are going to be cast at different points in the game. However, I do acknowledge the fact that it does add a certain degree of complexity, which is perhaps just not strictly necessary when you've got loads of stuff to remember in different phases anyway. You've then got to remember which spells you want to cast at which point in the game, rather than them all going off at broadly the same time. The spell casting seems relatively straightforward and much in line with the way we've seen it before, be it with some subtle differences. The dispel thing, I'm not so sure about that. The ranges to dispels, I'd rather you just can or you can't try and stop a spell rather than lots of extra things you've got to measure. But as I say, we're only really seeing part of the information here. We're not seeing full rules. We're seeing a description of how the rules will work and some of the rules. So I think it'll be a case of seeing how it plays out on the tabletop when the game comes out in 2024. So what is your take on the article on magic? Does it give enough information? Are you excited by the direction of travel? Or is this a step too far and you really just want to see a return to your cards and your magic dice to determine if spells go off or not? Do let me know down in the comments. But for now, that is all from me on this subject. Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this and perhaps the other videos I've done breaking down the various almanacks, do consider subscribing. It's the best way to support the channel, along with giving your few minutes of time each week to run one of the videos. So again, thank you very much for listening. I am returned to the old world. Have a great day.